So welcome back to the Vibe YouTube channel. I hope you are having a very good Sunday so far and that you've had a good week in these really unprecedented and challenging times. I hope you had a good week. So what we're going to be looking at today then, I'm going to be continuing on from Matt where he introduced us to the big picture series, and we're going to be looking at the story of Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat to get this idea how God always has this big picture for us. He always has this grand plan for us. So just to get started then, can you think of a time in your life where you felt a great sense of loss or things weren't going very well, you felt out of control? It can be anything. It could be from not winning a football match. It can be to revising really hard for an exam or a test that didn't go as well as you wanted it to be. It can be anything. But just spend a few moments now thinking of a time where you felt a great sense of loss. For my own personal story, this happened about 12 or 13 years ago. I remember I was round my granny's house and my mum came up to me, sat me down and said, "Look, Jacob, we're going to be moving house. We're going to be moving away from Bedfordshire to Oxfordshire, which is about 2.5 hours away." And she said, "We're going to be moving away." And I just remember at the time, I felt this huge sense of loss that mainly I was going to be moving away for so far away. So I was going to be a long way from my friends. So I was grieving that I wouldn't have those friendships anymore. I was worried about the new challenges that were going to come my way, such as starting a new school, trying to meet new people, trying to get settled again. And as you guys know, in those days I didn't particularly have the best fashion sense. As we remember, Florida 2005, those famous shorts that aren't quite shorts but aren't 3/4 lengths but are 3/4 lengths. You know, how on earth was I going to be able to make friends when I had such a ridiculous sense of fashion? So I just remember feeling this great sense of loss, that almost I was being completely uprooted and moving somewhere else. And I think just very quickly, just while you're continuing thinking about where you felt lost, in life there are these ups and downs, there are these ebbs and flows, and unfortunately that's almost an inevitable part of life. Sometimes it'll be great, we'll be successful, we'll be feeling joyful, everything will be going great, and then at other times things won't be going so well. We'll have challenges and difficulties that will come our way. But what we're going to be looking at today is that in those difficult times and in those challenges, God is there with us and that he does have this bigger picture for us. So let's begin by looking at Joseph's story. Okay, let's look at what happened to Joseph. So just a bit of context then. Joseph was one of 12 sons to someone called Jacob. Okay, and Jacob absolutely loved Joseph. Joseph was Jacob's favourite son. And what Jacob does to show this, to show how much he loves Joseph, he buys him and gets him this amazing robe or coat. And it's this amazing multicoloured coat. And it's absolutely beautiful. A king would stop and stare at it. It was that grand and that impressive. And of course, the 11 brothers got really, really annoyed and frustrated at this. And they felt really, really jealous and envious. So one day, they plot and plan, it says this all in Genesis 37, that they were going to kill him. They were going to sort of get some revenge for how much Jacob loved Joseph. So when they saw Joseph in the distance walking towards him, they all plan that they're going to get his coat, they're going to rip it off, and then they're going to shove Joseph into a well. So that's what they do. So Joseph comes along, the brothers rip off his coat, they pick him up and they shove them into this well. So let's just think about how Joseph would feel at that time. Primarily, he will feel completely and utterly betrayed. The people that he loves, his brothers, his family, have just completely betrayed him and tried to kill him. Think about how he might feel in terms of he never see his dad again. So Joseph is going through this great sense of loss, and it actually gets worse for Joseph as well. Some Israelites come walking along in the distance, and the brothers decide that actually, what's the point of killing Joseph when actually they can sell him into slavery and get a bit of money at the same time. So that is exactly what the brothers then decide to do. They sell him, and then Joseph is taken off to Egypt to go and be a slave. So Joseph has gone through this terrible sense of loss, of grief, of betrayal for what everyone has done to him. He's lost his family, his own brothers had tried to kill him. But even in this great sense of loss and difficulties and a huge challenge, which most importantly is completely out of Joseph's control. Joseph did not set up any of this. What happened to him was completely out of his control. In Genesis 39:2, it very clearly says the Lord was with Joseph. So in this really difficult, challenging, unprecedented time of Joseph's life, where he felt everything was ripped from underneath him, he had no one to rely on, he had no one to go and talk to, he was completely on his own, completely and utterly betrayed, the Lord was still with Joseph. So God still had this bigger picture for Joseph. And as we're going to see in the next couple of talks that will be uploaded in the next couple of weeks, you see that actually God has this amazing big picture for Joseph. So just looking at this then, the Lord was with Joseph. How can we apply this to our own lives, and how can we take this notion that the Lord was with Joseph to us? Well, primarily I think it's quite an encouraging story. Even though the circumstances of it are really quite horrible, we know that whenever we're going through challenges, God actually has a big picture for us. So when we are in these really challenging times, we can actually rest on that knowledge and know that ultimately God is with us. Okay. So how are we going to apply this then? Well, I think mainly this story shows us that God is always working for good in our lives and that he always wants what is best for us. But does that necessarily mean that things are going to change straight away? So when Joseph was put into that pit, was God going, because he was with Joseph, just going to get him out straight away? I don't think it necessarily means that. Okay, God does always want what's best for us and he is always with us. But these things sometimes take time and sometimes there's a longer plan there. So when we are in these really challenging times, God is still with us. And even though it might not feel like he pulls us out of the well straight away, he gets in there with us and he sits next to us and he comforts us. So when we do go through challenging times, we can rest in that knowledge that God is with us and reigns with us and loves us, and that ultimately we are not alone, and that despite those challenging situations, he's still there working with us and he's still there working for us. So what I really encourage you then, how to apply this, I'm going to encourage you to do this in sort of like two ways, okay? So there's two different ways. Number one, when you are going through a challenging time, or whatever time you're going through, so it could be now with coronavirus, just remember that God is with you and believe that he is with you. And you can do this in multiple ways. You can do it by reminding yourself, you can read over the story of Joseph for yourself, but just remind yourself that actually God is always there and he is with you and he does have this bigger picture. Okay? And then number two is look for God's presence. So when you are in these challenging times, take a moment just to look out for God's presence. And how can we do that? Because this is actually quite a challenging thing, looking for God's presence. It's something that's flown around quite a lot at church, let's pray, let's invite God's presence into our lives. But how do we actually do that? Well, I did a little devotion on rest. That's one way we can do it. So we can take 5 minutes out of our day and just pray and thank God that he's with us, and we can reflect on who he is and that he's with us and that he always has this bigger picture for us. Or we can do it through worship, we can do it through silence, we can do it through reading the Bible. There's so many different ways that you can pray and just invite God's presence. And when we invite God's presence, we can feel his rest and we can know that he's there and that actually he's working for us and that he is working on this big picture even though we can't see it. So this week, I want to really encourage you just to think about that bigger picture. If we just go back to my own story, we've decided as a family actually that moving to Oxfordshire was probably one of the best things our family has ever done. I've got great new friends. I went to a really good school, which helped me to get to university. So actually moving turned out to be fantastic. And even though at the time, perhaps like Joseph, I couldn't see this bigger picture and I felt this great sense of loss, of grief, of devastation, actually there is that bigger picture there. And as you're going to see in Joseph's life, his life turns out to be absolutely amazing. And spoiler alert, he does end up meeting with his brothers again, where he forgives them. But there is this huge, big picture there that we really should not forget about. Okay, so this week, during these challenging times, I just encourage you just to take a moment out of your day just to remind you that God is with you and that he loves you and that he does have a bigger picture for you. And even perhaps during this time at the moment or in the future, you might not feel like that he's there with you. You can always look back to that story of Joseph and know that God is with you. If you are in that challenging time, he's next to you in the world. You are not alone, but you can also reflect on the knowledge that he does have this bigger picture for you because he loves you and he's going to be with you. So I hope you have enjoyed that whistle-stop tour of the early part of Joseph's life, where he nearly gets killed but then actually gets sold into slavery by his brothers, and that actually God does have this bigger picture for us. So tune in next week for next week's talk, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you guys all soon. Stay safe.